the first time, also be that you have joined previous editions. And so for the benefit of those that are joining us for the very first time, I'll just share that the series are really designed to explore, discuss, and promote philanthropic activity at the intersection of gender justice and digital rights in Africa. And for the past several months, almost 2 years now, we've discussed topical issues around gender justice and more around how philanthropists on the African continent can engage more in the space, and how we can begin to crowd in support for proximate organizations that are working at the intersection of gender justice and digital rights. And so today, we have an amazing group of speakers that are joining us, and you will meet shortly when the moderator introduces them. Well, this topic is particularly interesting for us because there are lots of conversations around AI at the moment, and we've been to a lot of meetings. I'm sure those on this call and those at the African Philanthropy Forum as well. We've been to several meetings discussing how AI is shaping and changing the way we live, work, and interact. And it is important that we begin to see how we can leverage AI to drive the issue that is so important and we really need to focus on as a community at African Philanthropy Forum and as Africans living in Africa, how we can improve opportunities for women and girls, leveraging AI, leveraging technology. And so today, to moderate the panel, we have Adeboro Odunlami. She is the coordinator at African Internet Rights Alliance. Over to you, Adeboro.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yes, you can. All right, super. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Once again, allow me welcome you to this wonderful conversation. I'm incredibly delighted to be moderating this session. I have, like Muso has said, two fantastic women with me who are going to be mostly taking your questions and addressing my questions. I'm happy to be moderating. But before we start, I want to explain that this is going to be, or this is supposed to be a very interactive session, right? So not just the panelists interacting with themselves, but you yourself, right? Interacting. If you hear anything at any point that strikes a note in you, please drop it on the chat box. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it out as well on the chat box. With me, I have Juliet Nafunka and I have Deshni Govender. Yes, Juliet, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself, and after which Deshni takes over. Thank you.
Great. Well, good afternoon and good evening, everybody. Perhaps good morning to some of you. My name is Juliet Namfuka. I work with the Collaboration on International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa, otherwise known as CIPESA, and really excited to be here discussing the relationship between philanthropy, AI, and gender justice. I think it is one of those discussions that remains in the corners of our minds, but should be a whole lot more spoken about. So really excited to be here and looking forward to the contributions from all. Thanks.
Thank you, Juliet. Deshni.
Thanks, colleagues. Hi, everybody. So my name is Deshni, and I think Adeboro has given you a really nice overview of my bio. But I am the country focal point for the project Fair Forward Artificial Intelligence for All. I believe some of you may know it. And that is at the GSZ. I am based here in very, very sunny Johannesburg right now. And yeah, really quite looking forward to the conversation and definitely welcome your questions and interactions in the session.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So before we get into the panel conversation, permit me to take about 30 seconds of your time. Everybody has access to the raise hand feature, right? You can raise hand. I'll ask 3 questions and you raise your hand if you fall into any of that. So raise your hand if you heard an AI project. There's someone whose mic is on. Okay, thank you. So raise your hand if you heard of an AI project that has helped women or girls in Africa in any way. Could be education, could be access to whatever. Nobody. That is interesting. Okay, raise your hand. Okay, of course, Destiny, you have. Raise your hand if you are skeptical. Okay, good, Favor, I see that. Raise your hand if you are skeptical about AI actually helping gender equity. Like you don't know how that works or that will work. Okay, honesty in the room. Lots of honesty. Super, you are in the right place. Amazing. Definitely. Oh, wow. The hands keep going up. Skeptical but optimistic. Yes, amazing. And final question, raise your hand if you have an idea for a project that uses AI or that will use AI to help women or girls. All right, super. Awesome. Awesome, thank you. So we will jump into our conversation. That icebreaker was really to help us see that there is a need to have this conversation. People are skeptical. There are projects that exist that people don't know of that need more philanthropic support to get them out there. And people actually have ideas for this. And so I'll start off with Juliet and Destiny just giving us a background of how your work actually intersects with gender justice. And what is the single most important thing that your organization is looking to achieve with that work? Destiny, you can go first.
Okay, cool. So I think before we want to go into the organization and gender justice, maybe it might be worthwhile to look at some components of what we talk about when we want to embody and implement activities for gender justice. So maybe a few stats based on work that we've done recently.
I have friends, book and Shameless, and Lioness, one episode.
Friends. I think
Okay.
someone's mic is on and they're having. Okay, that was an interesting start. We'll continue. Okay, so we're talking about gender justice. Firstly, a very, very sad stat is that globally, less than half of the working age women, so people that can actually participate in the workforce, less than half of that are actually participating in the workforce. And that figure is about 47.7%. And also we know that it's not a secret that women are paid less than men for doing the exact same job. We also know that tech is proliferating in society, whether we want to or not. It's there, it's everywhere in our lives, on our phones, the way we communicate with our teams, how we order a cab, how we get food. So we understand that tech companies have a very big role to play in society. And so we ask ourselves, what is the level of representation of women in tech? And with that number is actually really, really, really sad. So there's a very minimal representation of women in tech across the different tech companies and tech adjacent companies. But that's also just dealing with women. When we start looking at representation at a leadership level, that number drops more. When we start looking at representation of Black, Indigenous, and minority communities, that number drops even more. From our own work, we know that we women want to advance in tech, and I'll get to some of those examples a little bit later on in the session. We know that women want to advance in tech, and we know that they want to understand AI, they want to participate, but there's a lack of access to resources, there's a lack of access to education and to on-the-job training. And that is exacerbated even more when you have biases in recruiting processes, biases from HR managers in companies, barriers to corporate advancement in the workplace. And so we have environments that are not inclusive. So when we start talking about, for example, how does our work intersect with gender and gender justice, we need to look at some of these elements. So our work at the Fair Forward Project is really very focused on, that's it, balancing the equation to the extent that we can. The intersection of AI and gender is really, really important, and it's very central to the work that we do at Fair Forward. And we hold a strong belief that one group or one sector, or one society or one gender should not be able to decide what technology should look like, what it should be like, how to operate for the rest of the world. You know, there's a saying we have in the tech environment in Africa, nothing for us without us. So Adibara posed a very hard question. What is the one thing we're working on? We're not necessarily working on one thing, but maybe 4 very important things, which is number 1, to demystify the concept of digital tech, AI, and gender stereotypes particularly, and redefine what the concept of gender justice is. We want to remove the fear and stigma about AI, what it is, what it's not. And we want to mainstream the idea that anyone, any woman, any female from anywhere, no matter your background, can participate in technology and AI field. We want to also create sustainable ecosystems so that we enable access to women and females to data, to compute power, to mentorships, the ability to access and present your critical research at international events and conferences, because having your voice heard is really important. And I suppose the last one that's really important to us is to create communities of network and support, because I think that having community support is really critical in advancing in the field.
Sounds like a lot. Thank you, Deshni. Juliet.
Great work being done by Deshni and her team. Well, as I didn't introduce CEPESA at the beginning, but what CEPESA does is we are a policy think tank. We do a lot of research into understanding what is shaping and informing the digital rights, the digital internet access landscape in the continent. And of course, over the years, the digital divide has become expressly blatant in many ways, in how we're interacting with it, in how it's ignored in some instances, in how it's being addressed in others, but also what it means for the future of digital inclusion when it comes to the evolution of AI and what's happening in that space. So we look at, Adibora asked for one thing. We're looking at this through very many lenses. We're looking at it through a policy lens. What do the developments here mean in terms of policy development and interventions? For example, what would an internet shutdown mean for gender justice? What would a price increment in data mean for digital inclusion and rights afforded to the different genders? So we're looking at that. We're also looking at what data privacy would look like. What is the data governance looking like when it comes to the gender dynamics there? So it's quite a minefield. We're also considering at things like content moderation. What's happening in that space? Where does the African woman, for example, find her space in the ecosystem of digital content moderation? Where does she rank? So those are quite interesting areas to understand, because they're in the corners of the internet discussions. And perhaps even though they feed into the broader discussion when it comes to the digital landscape, they still somehow find themselves in the corners, which is why I'm excited about the discussion like we're having here today. What does this all mean for skills development and economic inclusion, the gig economy as it's evolving? What does it mean in the African context? With reference to what I've just said, with reference to what Deshni has also mentioned. So those are all dynamics we're looking at through the lens of policy interventions, through interactions with the various stakeholders, including law enforcement, government representatives, platforms themselves. What is happening? Where do we fit in the African woman, the gender dynamics of these discussions into broader best practice discussions? We tend to absorb a lot from other parts of the world, but their contexts are very different to the dynamics that we're dealing with in the continent. Kenya, for example, behaves very differently to South Africa, very differently to Nigeria, very differently to Uganda, So, oh, there, there are all those nuances that we need to appreciate and understand when trying to make sense of a lot of the digital ecosystem when it comes to the continent. But we try to do that through a policy-driven lens. And so our one thing would really to see that we work towards a digital society that is more inclusive, more representative of the different peoples in that space, the different contexts and dynamics that we find both online and offline.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Juliet. Thank you, Deshni. Juliet, you said something that was really profound, which is we're reaching to the corners of the internet, right? To have these conversations. And you also mentioned, as you were speaking, that even as prolific advocates as we are still trying to understand many things. That's why we're doing research and so on and so forth. You can hear me, can you? Yes. Never mind, I think my screen is frozen, but you know what? We just keep moving. All right. So, Juliet, my next question is really to you because you see, for people like us, this is our work. We understand when people say, "Oh, AI policy," or we understand when people talk about digital ID and biometrics and how it affects gender justice and so on and so forth. These are words that we encounter every day. But there are people here. There may be people here who are actually in the philanthropic space but don't have any understanding of what is, AI and digital tech and so on. So can you please share some examples, some very practical, easy to understand examples where artificial intelligence or the use of similar technology has actually contributed to positive outcomes in gender justice within your program or within any other program that you're aware of?
Juliet, you're on
Muted.
mute.
Sorry, in my excitement to respond to the question. So what I was saying is, perhaps I'll start broadly and then narrow it down to more specific cases. And it's fantastic to have a space where we have folk from different backgrounds, with different perspectives and understandings of these discussions. Sometimes you get caught up in the buzzwords of the area in which you work. But anyway, so I'll start a few years ago, there was a publication that was released in the US. It was looking at how AI at the time was behaving. And it was of an individual crossing a road. And so Deshni might be familiar with this case as well. So they had different skin-colored people cross the road. But guess who's most likely to get knocked down in this virtual reality? It was the darker hued individual, not the light-skinned person, so that showed how AI was perceiving race, for example. A few years later, there was a case of somebody, doing a Google search on angry woman. And guess the people who showed up as angry women? It was largely darker skinned African women or African American women. So it shows you how AI at the time was perceiving or framing human beings. Okay, it was seeing us through one lens and one lens alone, ignoring that we are a complex ecosystem of people and experiences and emotions and existences. And so that is where some of these issues that we talk about on bias, on representation come in when we start considering AI in the greater scheme of things and what it means for people who may not necessarily have access to the tools, be part of the development of the tools, or simply do not have enough representation in online spaces. And in that respect, I refer to the continent, which still has way more than 50% to come online still. So while it may seem that everybody's online, in actual fact, a lot of the continent is still far removed from the digital space. And those who might have digital access may not necessarily be using the tools in ways that contribute to the learnings of the machines, the NLPs and all those fancy words, machine learning tactics. So when we push that further, we try to understand, okay, so in the current context, what does this all mean for issues such as content moderation? And when we look at content moderation, we are looking at how platforms respond to problematic content pushed on online spaces. We see a lot of problematic content pushed during elections, during times of public protest, but also just every day. We see a lot of problematic content that sexualizes women, children. It demeans, it belittles, but it also oversteps personal privacy. It oversteps personal spaces and agency in online spaces. Those are dynamics that we're trying to address, and the extensions of what I've said previously. It's a constant state of evolution that we are caught up in. And so we try to look at cases like disinformation that uses the female form, for example, and associates it negatively with a particular political party or individual. We have seen the exploitation of women's bodies to generate vast amounts of money for various individuals without their consent, without their knowledge. Sometimes there was a case a while back of a young girl's image that was used in a very problematic manner to make money for a platform. She had no phone, not even a feature phone. It was just an image that was taken of her and used to generate an income elsewhere. So issues of agency, issues of data privacy, the things that we hold tightly in the offline world through a gendered lens are what we're trying to address in the online world through a gendered lens as well, especially for the African woman, who for some reason seems to rank right at the bottom when it comes to a lot of these discussions. She is most likely to be exploited offline and by extension online. She is most likely to be unheard offline as she is online. So those are dynamics that we see playing between the online and offline spaces that we're really keen or trying to address better. We see this in the media world as well. Where are female journalists working versus male journalists? They start doing soft stories or they're going out into the field. In tech reporting, who is being voiced as an authority or sourced as an authority? Is it your female engineer or your male engineer? So those are the dynamics that we're trying to create more awareness of, that in as much as they exist offline, they exist online too and need to be addressed, so we do not have the spillage of these dynamics into the digital space as well, that machines continue with the perpetuation of those dynamics.
Thank you so much, Julia. You've mentioned a number of different ideas, projects, content moderation, distribution of non-consensual intimate images online, and really just projects that revolve around representing women in tech, as Deshni has said. And so I'll come to you, Deshni. My question is around your expertise and the opportunity that you have as an implementing entity to support AI projects that are very diverse. So you support projects on access to data, capacity development. So you have access to so many proposals and so many projects. My question is, what has your experience been supporting AI projects on the continent? If you can just share for any funder, any donor, any person here who's looking into going into that, what does it look like? And if you have any examples of gender justice projects within your portfolio as well, would be great as well to share.
Sure. So yes, it is a very important and critical question. I'm going to deviate quickly for like 30 seconds before I answer the question. And it's something that happened when we were discussing when we were actually at Mozilla Festival a few weeks ago with the colleagues from Fair Forward and some amazing, amazing women in the field. And it's so funny because, a thought came to my mind when we were talking about philanthropy and what does that mean? And oftentimes we think of philanthropy or implementation or funding as this benevolent thing that comes from Western societies to, to help us, to help Africa, to uplift us. And we sometimes forget that philanthropy is something that we can do at home. Philanthropy is something we can do here on the continent. It doesn't have to be this power hegemony that has to come here and be the savior for us. And when we start looking at funding and implementation agencies, I think the first thing when we're talking about funder and donor and implementation agencies, they have a really critical role to play in bringing equality, but also equity. And those are two very different things when we're talking about the gender gap and gender justice. And that is really critical in understanding that nuance first before we get entities coming into the field to do something. So philanthropy is more than just donating money for a cause, or implementing agencies or donor entities is going beyond, oh, we have this money, let's go train some women. It needs to be very thought out and very curated. And so the first experience that I've had is understanding what does that curation, what does that thinking process look like? What does that mean when we say we want to work at the intersectionality of AI and gender? And then when you want to start to curate these types of funding and this type of support, you need to ensure that you have a clear picture of what you want to achieve and what is the outcome and the impact of that. And again, like I said, it sounds very sexy when they're like, oh, we're hosting this hackathon for, 5,000 girls. And what is your end game with this? So when we look at curating programs and activities, you want to ensure that you make women and minorities feel included, feel supported. You need to think carefully about what it is that you're doing. Different types of support are needed for different things. And Juliet mentioned the conversation in her opening, the answer to the opening question, that the issues of Africa are not all-encompassing, right? What is an issue or a barrier for me as a woman in South Africa is a different barrier for Juliet in Uganda, is a different barrier for colleagues in Kenya, is a different barrier for Nigeria. So you need to look at the different types of support that's needed for different things. There's no one size fits all. So that's the first part. So this whole concept of we did this thing here and let's take it and put it in South Africa and, here, there, and everywhere else, it doesn't work. So that is why we're saying, cool, equality, cool, you're giving the same thing to everybody. Equity, we're giving what is needed for which groups of people and looking at the benchmark we want to achieve and what do those people in different countries need to achieve that benchmark. So that's the first part. I think if we're talking about activities, one of the activities that maybe some people on the call might have come across is, and that directly speaks to this point, is the AI and Data Science Bootcamp for Women that we did with the Fair Forward project. And so we started the project by piloting it in South Africa. And in South Africa, we did it as a hybrid model. So some parts online, some parts in person. And then we scaled this to Ghana, Rwanda, Uganda, and then soon Indonesia will be adapting this concept for the LGBTQ community. Now you're probably thinking, well, Desh just said, well, you can't do this and take it there and take it there. Yes, I did just say that. So what makes this program different? When we started this in South Africa, we had to understand fully the ecosystem of what are the barriers that people face in South Africa and then curate the program. But then we were able to take the same foundational concepts of what we were teaching the women and what we're doing, and then look at how this might be different if we did this in Ghana, if we did this in Rwanda. And so we had to curate the program tailored for the needs of the women in each country. So in Ghana and Rwanda, for example, we didn't do it as a hybrid model because the ecosystem dictates that the women should be together on site. And so in Ghana, we did it in Accra, where we had all the ladies together in Accra on site, same for Rwanda and Kigali. And I would use this also as an opportunity to absolutely give a shout out to my team at Fair Forward, GZ, because it was not just a one-person situation that made this. It was all of the country focal points in the different countries that came together that made this possible and made this bootcamp possible. And I really want to take this opportunity to thank the amazing women in our team. But what did this experience teach us? Number one, gender justice requires an intersectional approach. So it's not just about looking at gender and AI, but you look at sexual identity, you look at race, you look at economic circumstances, professional circumstances. What are the barriers to entry into the AI field? What is stopping someone from participating in South Africa? And is that different barriers for Kenya? And you need to then look at any program or activity that you craft when you're doing donor funding, implementation, or philanthropy. You curate it to the specific needs of the woman in the countries. So that's the first part, using an intersectional approach. The second thing is what works for a global north doesn't always work for Africa. And I say this in context. We oftentimes find that there's amazing programs online on edX, on Coursera. You're like, oh, capacity development for this, or you do this program online, or we'll sponsor 10 women or 100 women to go online and do this scholarship. But these programs are not curated for the needs of the people in the countries that they're operating in. So most of the time, capacity development is centered for men because they're only and majority men in the tech field. It's what it is. We can't change it, can't get angry about it. We can work to make a difference to change that number, but we can't change what the situation is now, but we can work for impact. So these opportunities are crafted for people who are already in the field. And that doesn't help when you need to do training for women who have other needs. For example, when you're looking at women and what their needs are, you're going to look at a flexible training schedule rather than a fixed training schedule, because we know that women have unpaid domestic care duties, domestic responsibilities. There's a plethora of things that women have to deal with over and above trying to educate themselves and get into a field and participate meaningfully in a field. So when you're looking at a flexible training schedule, you're looking at how
See you tomorrow. Bye.
Okay. You're looking at how a woman, and then again, you're thinking of, oh, cool, let's do this training program. But what about women who are mothers? What about women who have young babies? What does that mean for them? They should not be excluded from participating, because a lot of the time we're thinking of, oh, well, the single corporate professional woman. That's not the only woman. Secondly, finding women who are role models and mentors to support other women is so critical when we're talking about gender justice and bringing women into the field and trying to craft a difference. It's easier to say, cool, look at, Steve Jobs, or look at the CEO of Apple, look at the CEO, you can be that too. But it doesn't help if I don't see someone that looks like me, if I don't see a female developer, if I don't see a female data scientist, if I don't see a woman who's heading up a tech team, because in my mind, I do not see myself in a person who's of European origins, who's a man. I want to see somebody that represents South Africa, that represents females, that represents someone that I can relate to know that I have a pathway because a pathway was created. So that is really important. And I mean, these are just some of the lessons. I'm getting a bit too carried away, so I'll move on very quickly. The last thing our experience is talking about creating equity and equality. The difference is that it takes time and it takes effort. And you've listened to the things that we've done. We have put some information online about the bootcamp, but in other contexts where we've done NLP development, it's a lot harder to make meaningful change and impact. It takes more effort. It takes knowledge about the subject matter. It takes working with service providers and grantees who share the vision of what you want. Oftentimes you'd find philanthropic entities like, okay, cool, we have this challenge. All right, we'll give money to, and forgive me, Juliet, for using an example, we're going to give money to Juliet's company, and Juliet can now, go and create change. But it is important that Juliet also speaks to the vision and understanding of what change you want to create, else you're wasting your time. So having service providers or people that share that vision is really, really important to achieve greater impact, because the impact is what we want. That's what's going to change something. Numbers, just, ticking boxes of numbers is not going to get change.
Thank you, Deshni. That was a lot, but that was really great gold. And I have some follow-up questions which I would like you to think about before I come back to you. I was really thinking around the first thing you said around what is philanthropy and how that it's not just being benevolent. Even the funders have to participate in the deep design thinking process of the project and be innate and understand what is their end game. And the final thing you said was that it takes time, right? Change takes time, it takes effort. So my question to you would be, how would you address, say there is a funder here or there's someone from the philanthropy community here who wants to truly understand how to balance seeing outcomes from the projects that they are funding versus understanding that change takes time, it takes effort. So what are some things that perhaps they can put in place to have a good balance of that, to not keep investing in something, maybe they're not seeing results yet, to know that, you know what, this is because change takes time, or to know when to pull out investments or to keep going. So I'll allow you think on that while I come to Juliet. Juliet, I think I have similar questions for you. I know that CIPESA runs the African Digital Rights Fund. And my question to you would be, as someone who's been on the end of, disbursing funds, but also on the end of receiving funds in that sense on the continent, what do you think are some of the biggest opportunities for gender justice on the continent, basically in projects? So what are some areas you're seeing that are not being fully explored around gender justice, artificial intelligence, or really just around digital technology and gender justice?
Great. The possibilities are absolutely endless. Absolutely endless. But I think to understand where we are now, we need to understand where the world of philanthropy has come from. It has its origins closely linked to the colonial era, just post-colonialism. And like many things linked to that time, it's been evolving over time. From one where it was a culture of dictating what an entity should do that they were giving funds to one where there's a bit more interaction with a potential recipient of funding. That's where we have evolved to, or are evolving to increasingly today. 2020 saw a big shift in how the world of philanthropy works, where there was a much bigger increment in funding given to grassroots, so smaller entities, a bit more directly, as opposed to going to larger entities who had dominated the funding scene for quite some time. And in that approach, we have seen a whole lot more opportunity come up, a whole lot more fantastic ideas come up, these ideas that have never risen to the top because there were other players dominating that field. And that is where CIPESA, entities like CIPESA come in. So since just before COVID, we've been running the Africa Digital Rights Fund. It is a fund that disperses between $5,000 and $20,000 to smaller entities doing interesting work on a whole host of issues, including on gender justice and AI. And these are entities that would have otherwise not received any funding because they perhaps do not meet the funding requirements that bigger funding entities require in order to receive funds, despite them doing fantastic work. And so over the years, we have worked with smaller entities doing, we were talking about turnaround time for impact and stuff, doing small projects, but with huge impacts in communities that would really not feature in the broader scheme of things. So among them, we have projects in Cape Town that have done work on AI. We have got a project that is trying to increase access to data, for example, because we need data to pursue our policy interventions. We need data to address some of the harms that we are seeing online. With the recent shift in platforms, data access has become a whole lot more harder than it was previously. So, trying to provide the support necessary to access data or to campaign for increased access to data helps with campaigns on gender justice, for example. So that's, a small project, but powerful impact in the greater scheme of things. It may take a while, but it's an intervention that I think we can be proud of in that respect, coming out of a very small grant, coming out of an entity that saw the problem, might have not had access to the bigger funding agencies, but we came into play a role there. So excited about that. And so that is just one of various other examples of campaigns that we have supported. We've supported a campaign in Tanzania that sought to increase the visibility of female politicians in Tanzania. And that went a long way because, there are cultural dynamics, there's digital savvy dynamics, so small interventions that have big impact is what this funding has enabled various entities to do. We have also worked with an entity that has now created a very simple tool for reporting disinformation in a very visual way, very accessible way. It's called Community Threats, but it has only just launched in the last week or so. But, very small interventions, big impact, without having to jump through the various loopholes that accessing funding typically requires in some of the landscapes that we work in. So when I say there's lots of opportunity for gender justice and AI, it's immense because we have an entire landscape of entities to now tap into more directly than your usual players who have generally dominated access to funding. We are tapping into individuals as well with fantastic ideas, but did not have opportunity to access the necessary funding. We're also encouraging collaborations across countries, across regions. I saw somebody in the comment section mention that as well. So we're encouraging the movement of information. We're encouraging intersectionality. I mean, today is International Day for Persons with Disabilities. What does it mean for gender justice? What does it mean when we also add in a layer of AI to that debate? What type of work can be done in that respect? So that kind of thinking is where we want to be. That kind of thinking is what we'd like to really support, but it requires a whole lot more interaction between different actors. And those are entities that generally tend to get the funding because you're bringing in all these fantastic ideas from different places, different individuals, different skill sets. But you're pushing an agenda forward, an agenda that has been birthed out of you as opposed to forced down on you. So yeah, lots of room for opportunity. And yeah, so just look out for the call. We should be releasing a call for funding support soon. We'll share it when it's ready. But yeah, please do apply. But bring fantastic ideas. We need to do this work. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Juliet. And just to take a pause here to say that this is why the work that the African Philanthropy Forum is doing is great because, as advocates, we have our forums that we meet. We meet at different fora. We share thoughts, we share ideas from our work. But there's hardly consistent dialogue for funders and for donors. And I think that's what APF is trying to do. So that's very laudable. We have we don't even have 1 minute. We have 30 seconds. So Darshini, I will allow you to take the question that I asked, but I also would want you to just answer one question in addition to that, which is what areas do you think that philanthropic contribution can move the needle forward? We've already spoken about it this way, that way, but I want you to be just more direct, one area. And then when you're done, Juliet, also just answers that question, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Thank you.
You're killing me. You're killing me. Why? What have I spoken about already? I would say I've spoken about the use of intermediaries. I think those could be a good element, an important role to play in the philanthropic world, and also finding the right intermediaries. I would say two things. So number one, consider the barriers for philanthropic ventures. So Julia just mentioned now about funding and talking about access to funding, but also important to know if we want to be inclusive and representative, what does that mean? Where do you advertise your funding? What is the language we're using when we're saying, cool, we want people to apply for things? Is it inclusive language? Does it speak to an environment that women and minorities and people from Africa and the global South will feel comfortable with? Is it only in English? You know, in very high level English. So people are like, oh no, maybe I don't feel comfortable. Maybe my English isn't that good. So when we're looking at philanthropic ventures also, I think the idea is to make it relatable to the people that you want to craft change with. The other thing also is, does it take, 8 hours of research in 2 months just to write a proposal for a philanthropic entity or a funder or a donor organization to take 6 months to then review it to give feedback? What are these barriers to participation? And is it, are we really saying, cool, well, this is what we need as an organization to do our reporting, so we're going to pass all of this complication on to the people we want to support? That is not ideal. That doesn't move the needle anywhere. As a matter of fact, it actually just regresses the situation. And then the second one would also be to remove power hegemonies. And I think I've just spoken, I did touch on it earlier, is about sustainability of actions. So when we're talking about all the things we want to achieve, whether it's protecting women online, whether it's giving women more rights, whether it's educating women and giving them an edge, giving them autonomy and independence, we want to do this so that they're not left there, what I would call Oliver twisting. So when this activity is over, we're sitting there saying, can we have more money for something else? I think it's important for philanthropists or any funding or implementation agency to look at how do you sustain the activity by capacitating that community so that they are left better, or that group or that society, so that they are left better, they are left with skills, they are left with some self-determination, rather than saying, we're coming in for this activity, we've done the activity, it's great, and now we're leaving. So I think those would be the two important things.
That's amazing. I'll do a recap when Juliet is on, but Juliet, let me know what you thought.
I fully agree with everything Deshni has said. She raises very, very key points. I think the language of the internet is very exclusive. It removes some people and it forces a division, as was mentioned earlier when it was pointed out that we have people from different backgrounds here. Unfortunately, we support these divisions even in our language. So well spotted. But it also points to what has been added to the chat about the grading of submissions, which again comes back to language. We are caught up in an age where entities are receiving thousands of applications and having limited resources to go through all those applications and relying on AI tools to sift through submissions made. We don't do that at CPESA. We have an entire team that is dedicated to reviewing each and every individual submission that is made, and they're kept simple because of this very issue of language, of accessibility. We don't want to make this a scary process for entities interested in applying, because that is exactly what we're trying to step away from. The fear of making a submission or the fear of losing out on fantastic ideas because we've overcomplicated the process. So that is something that we're quite proud of at CPESA. But yeah, ultimately we need to, in as much as we're talking philanthropy, we need to understand that the digital society is made up of a broad spectrum of stakeholders, some more active than others. We keep talking about the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance. We can't achieve gender justice if we only engage with some sectors of the stakeholder community at the cost of others. So we need to create room to have difficult discussions with the different entities. And some of these discussions are not comfortable at all. When you sit down with a platform developer and try to tell them that an issue is concerning at a gendered level, sometimes they just don't get it. Because as was pointed out, this is somebody straight from Silicon Valley out in San Francisco. Their lived experience is completely far removed from the dynamics here. But what they feel they produced is a fantastic tool. It's solving society's problems. but in actual fact is creating a problem elsewhere. So how do you create spaces to find a middle ground that accommodates that level of thinking with the level of thinking of somebody who has fallen victim to the tools created? And where does philanthropy support that kind of interaction? Are we hyper-focused on certain segments of the digital society than others? Yeah, so those are no solutions here, but more room for questions on what we need to be thinking about and perhaps pushing a lot more when it comes to trying to address these issues. So philanthropy really should look at creating more spaces for difficult discussions. I think that's where we need to be going forward. We have gotten many solutions, but were those solutions the necessary solutions or assumed solutions? Are we responding to them? We've seen so many tools come out, but are they being used? What's been their impact? And that's because we've not had that full interaction between the different stakeholders that some philanthropic efforts perhaps do not necessarily support. They'll say, well, we don't support government interventions or government meetings, but you need them. They're the policymakers, are the ones making the laws. We don't support law enforcement because they're the ones arresting people. You can kind of need them too. So we need to shift how we think about some of these things. We need to adapt how we want to reach solutions, and that means creating more spaces for bigger deliberations than we previously have seen. Yeah, so yeah, that would be my contribution. Let's create more spaces for difficult discussions.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Juliet and Deshan. You mentioned more space for dialogue. Thank you, APF, for creating this space for dialogue. You mentioned adaptive support for funders and donors to support as the need demands and not to be strict about their support. And you've also mentioned being relatable, simplifying the processes, and being sustainable, right, in your projects, ensuring that you're capacitating the groups that your project supports. We have a bunch of questions in the chat box and a bunch of conversations already going on. Thank you, Deshni. You've replied to some questions that were directed to you. There are conversations around decolonizing AI technologies, and we see contributions around initiatives in Kenya, in South Africa, in Ghana that are already doing that. One question here that is being re-echoed is around discrimination and biases, and how that, where is that? Where is that question? Okay, yeah. And how can we course correct to ensure that these AI tools that we are supporting don't reinforce these biases? One person can just take the answer so we can go on. Oh, Deshni has already responded to that. Okay, that's great. We'll move on. I just saw. We also have a question around an example of an AI tool. Daniel has responded to that. Daniel, there's also, yes, I think this is the business I was going to talk about as well, the idea, the project I was going to talk about as well. Mona Lisa, there's also a project, I can't remember where it is, but there is like a community AI center set up, because obviously not all the women in the community can have access to that platform. And women are farmers, so they can walk into that community center and literally speak to the AI tool and say, I have 10 bags of cocoa, how much is like the market rate right now, so that at least they're not being cheated, right? So those are great ideas. I think we've answered all the questions we have in the chat box. If you have any question that you would like to verbalize, now is a good time to raise your hand so that you can ask them directly to the panelists. How can we teach illiterate women for technology inclusion, and what are the best practices? In Ethiopia, there are only 28% of women literate. So what do you see as best practices for digital literacy? Anyone can take.
I can jump into that. Ethiopia is a very fascinating country. It's one that for a long time relied on a monopoly, Ethio Telecom, to provide services before Safaricom entered the market. About 2 years ago. So that created a bit of competition, a bit more affordable data access. But just because there's a bit of competition does not mean that more people become literate when it comes to digital society. It was never going to happen immediately. And it's like many of the countries that we find in this part of the world. We may have competition, but that does not necessarily translate into digital literacy. But as was mentioned earlier, some of these things do take time. Ethiopia has also been caught in a bit of conflict in some of the regions, which again has put some negative perceptions around the use of digital technologies, which has also affected its adoption in some instances. But also that there's the gender digital divide. Who has access to finance and who doesn't? Who has access to data and who doesn't? So no real response there, but that it takes time, as it's a country that has only just entered a liberalized internet access regime.
Yeah, I resonate with you on that point. Thank you all so much. We've actually come to the end of this. Please don't leave yet. We're going to have Musum come forward and speak to us. But thank you to my panelists. Thank you, Juliet. Thank you, Deshni. The conversation was amazing. Always happy to be in the midst of brilliant women. And now I'll pass it back to Musum.
Atipora, before we go, I think there's one last question, and I think it's a critical one, and I'll take maybe 2 minutes. It is from Mona Lisa that says, chat just moved. Mona Lisa says, what is the link between AI and sustainability? To simplify the question, how can we infuse ethics in the AI that we are building? So firstly, this is such a critical one. Hello. Someone just called a minute. So I think it's such a critical one because it speaks exactly to the point that Juliet was talking about. It speaks to the elements that I've spoken about in terms of inclusion. So the idea of, and I'm going to digress a little bit, like what really, really annoys me, especially when I see it on social media, which is why I try to limit my social media, is the whataboutism. Like all this effort, like, oh, we want to train women and we want to pass women and all these rights for women. What about men? And just need to take a moment and center myself, because any woman who's on this call, who's experienced, or any person from a minority group or a diverse community will fully understand the implications of that when we start about the whataboutism. And that is the reason why we're saying when we talk about these elements of having diverse perspectives, that is what we're talking about ethics. It's also important to understand that ethics means different things to different communities. So what one community may find ethical, that, for example, we in South Africa support same-sex relationships. You're allowed to get married and have a union. And another country, maybe of a different religious persuasion or a different political persuasion, may find that unethical. And so when we're talking about bringing ethics and diversity into AI, this is why the element of inclusion is so important, because you don't have one person's view on what is right, what is appropriate, what is ethical, and that view doesn't either come from Silicon Valley or US or UK or Europe or whatever the case may be. It's a view that is created, and that's why it's important for these philanthropic measures to start helping people, whether that form of help comes in helping women to gain rights, helping digital literacy measures, helping people and small to medium enterprises and small startups build solutions and applications that are solving for the problems in the communities that they need. It's not something that says, oh, we built this thing for you for the farmers in Kenya. Did you consult the farmers in Kenya? Did you find out what the farmers in Kenya actually need before building an app for them? And what are those barriers? So the elements of ethics in AI is critically important. And I think that that's where a lot of people are failing. And Juliet illustrated the point nicely when she says, you talk to a person, wherever that person is, and let's assume this person is sitting in Serbia. and you talk to them about the African perspective, and this developer's like, I built you the product that you wanted. Why are you asking me these questions? Why do you need this? And why is that? Because they don't understand the relatability. So when we're talking about putting ethics into products, it's as much as identifying biases and harms as it is about creating products that are working for the society it's meant to help, and it's created by the society that it's meant to help. And there's a lot of information online on this. I'm more than happy to put some content in the chat as well. There's toolkits on how to look at responsible AI assessments. There's like a plethora of information around what is fair, what is inclusive. Timnit Gabru speaks a lot about this also in the context of East African diaspora. So definitely happy to share some information on that.
Can I ask a very quick question? Deshni, thank you for the links you shared. But when I looked at them, they were all African specific, but it doesn't necessarily tackle the gender patriarchal element. And that's the bit that I'm mostly interested in, because we are doing work on AI and economic policy. And the data that is feeding through with all the patriarchal biases on the continent. So that's why I asked that specific question. The sites, I've just been flicking through them just to quickly check. And they are trying to Africanize AI, but it doesn't take out the patriarchal gender element. So if you know of any of those, I'd love to hear about it, because we are helping governments to use AI in economic policy formulation, and we are trying to make them more gender informed, but the data we're getting are reflecting the biases that already exist in our society. So sorry, Madam Moderator, for chipping in. I just had a very specific ask, that was all.
For all the philanthropists on the call, all the implementation agencies, all the funders, and all the people with deep pockets, please understand that it is critically important to do gender disaggregated data collection. So please deep into your pockets and support all the activities that Juliet has mentioned, all the activities that we want to do to help make this more informed. And to the speaker's previous point, we need the data. Please help us collect the data, synthesize it, analyze it.
All right, thank you, Deshni. So data is a big need, and excited that this is the African Philanthropy Forum, so we have the right people in the room. Thank you very much. Pass the mic to Mosum.
Thank you very much, Adibor, for steering the conversation this afternoon or morning, evening, depending on where our guests are tuning in from. This has been very informative and valuable. There's always such value when we bring experts into the room. We are not experts. We know bits of these issues. In fact, we know very little when it comes to AI specifically, and then even less when we talk about how philanthropy intersects with the AI and also around gender justice. So thank you so much for shedding light, Adeboro, Juliet, and Deshni, for speaking from your wealth of experiences and being so willing to respond to questions in the chat and also directly from just speaking to the issues. We're really grateful. This is the final session for this year. We started out having a session around STEM, where we talked about how we can leverage technology to improve inclusion and how we're driving STEM around the continent. And then we went on to look at, I think that was probably one of the most highly attended sessions in the gender justice series, when we looked at how philanthropy can contribute to digital safety and gender justice. That was a big one, and I can see that it's even coming through in today's conversation. So that's something we need to go back and take a deeper look at APF and on how we can broaden that discussion and share more around that within our community. So thank you so much, and thank you for all the active participants in the chat box. It's been very interactive on that side as well. I just feel like a couple of other participants were also speakers. So thank you. And thank you, Mavis. We welcome that interjection. It's important that you put that out there. I have an additional ask of our speakers, Deshni, Adeboro, Juliet. You have access to a lot of information, to data that members of our community would find valuable in making decisions and just learning more around this. So please send us all the relevant details and links, some that you already referred to and others that may come to you after this. If you can do that today, we really would appreciate that, because we're going to send the recording to everyone who participated later on this week, and we can include those links in the email that would go out. So thank you so much, and thank you to all our participants, and a big shout out to Yinka Shitu, our program coordinator, for putting this together. I don't know any of these speakers. He literally hunted them down and said, Mosun, they have to speak on this panel. So thank you, Yinka, for doing that. And again, Deshni, Juliet, and Adibor, yesterday when we had our debrief, just to let everyone know, I told them there's a lot of pressure. This is our final session, and so we started on a high note. We need to end on a higher note. So thank you for living up to that challenge, and thank you also to the rest of the APF team for contributing to this on the back end. Finally, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Ford Foundation for consistently supporting APF and also supporting the Gender Justice and Digital Technology series. It's been really helpful having the backing of a donor that is consistent and is supporting issues that are less, focused on. So thank you for doing this, and we look forward to continued engagement in this space. Enjoy the rest of your day and week, and Merry Christmas. I'm a Christmas I'm a Christmas person. I'm very much in the mood right now. For those who celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas, and for those who enjoy the end of the year season, and Happy New Year in advance. Thank you.